fun, it's fast, it's new. Board sailing, windsurfing, sailboarding, call it what you will, the principles are the same. A board, a sail, a fair wind, a clear stretch of water, and you're away. You can board sail on the sea, on lakes, and on inland reservoirs. It's practical, it's portable, and it's accessible. Put your board on the top or in the back of the car and off you go. It's freedom, it's independence. As a sport, board sailing combines the sensation of sailing with the excitement of surfing and the speed of water skiing. It's now a recognised Olympic sport, and yet learning to board sail can be easy if you get the right start. And that's precisely what we propose to give you in this programme. The overall European champion, Dee Caldwell, will show you how to board sail, taking you from the moment you first step onto the board through to steering and turning, and how to freestyle and jump. In short, he'll be showing you how to get the most out of your board and have fun. You can always tell when you've arrived at a board sailing resort, not by looking out to the water and spotting the boards in action, but by the clusters of people on the shore laughing at beginners falling off. That's one of the painful realities about learning to board sail. You tend to get very wet. So we suggest you start on a land-based simulator. It's a method used by most board sailing schools. It's exactly the same as a regular board, except that it's balanced on a pivot so that the pupil can feel the board move with the wind, just as you would in the water, but without getting wet. If you haven't got access to a simulator, just lay your board on the beach and practice your manoeuvres there. Let's take a close look at the board. It's important you should learn the parts of the board before you start learning to sail. The front, or the bow, is the pointed or upturned end. The back, or the stern, is the blunt end. The dagger board slots vertically through the board to stop it going sideways, but we'll keep it aside while we've got the board on land. And at the back, the skeg, which helps steering by giving directional stability. That's the board. Now we can introduce the rig, that is the mast, wishbone boom and sail. It's fixed to the board by way of a universal joint, so that the rig can be laid flat on the water before raising it to the starting position. The mast, which keeps the sail taut, is joined to the wishbone boom, which acts as the handle or the steering wheel of the sailboard. The sail could be called the engine of the sailboard. It's usually equipped with a window to help avoid collisions at sea. And that's it. It's so simple, it's ingenious. But there is one other essential ingredient to take in before you start, and that is, of course, the wind. You must know where the wind is coming from before you start to sail. The more experienced board sailor will be able to judge the direction and the force of the wind simply by the feel of the flapping sail as he picks up the rig. The uncertain beginner is advised to check on the wind direction before getting onto the board. It's easily done. Pick up a handful of sand and watch how the grains fall. Look out for any board sails on the land or any flags. Let's pause here and look at the varieties of wind and learn some sailing jargon. A wind blowing onto the shore is called an onshore wind. A wind blowing away from the shore is an offshore wind. And variable on these, such as winds blowing parallel to the shore or winds blowing at an angle to the shore, are cross-shore winds. Now some sailing words to remember. Suppose you have an onshore wind and you're sailing across the wind. A movement towards the wind, that is, upwind or windward, is called luffing up. A movement away from the wind, that is, downwind or leeward, is called bearing away. Learn these words now because they'll be used in every lesson from now on. Now let's take a look at the sailboard in action and find out why the wind propels it in the way that it does. Suppose you have an onshore wind and the board is sailing across the wind. The wind is deflected by the aerodynamic shape of the curved sail, creating a pressure difference between the inside and the outside of the sail. But if the wind is putting pressure on the inside of the sail, why doesn't the board react by sailing sideways? The answer is because of the board's underwater body. The long surface of the board, the dagger board slotted in underneath, and the skeg at the back resist the sideways pressure and convert it into a forward movement. Now you know how the board works, let's join Dee Caldwell and get going.
Experienced board sailors and instructors will suggest that you get a feel for the board first. Put pressure on the front and back of the board to see how, if you step beyond a certain area, the board will begin to capsize, whether on the land or on the water. Feel the grip, the roughened, non-slip surface on the board where you place your feet. Climb onto the board as if you just scrambled out of the water. Check where the wind is coming from. It should be behind you, blowing onto your back. Now pull the rig out of the water. Bend your knees, head up, back straight, and pull the rig up slowly to start with. After you've got it clear of the water, start standing and pull it up quickly. Your front foot, the foot nearest the front of the board, should rest with the instep against the mast. Your back foot, the foot nearest the back, should stand over the dagger board slot. That's the master beam position, the vital first stage to successful board sailing. Your mast is held high, the rig at right angles to the board, and the wind at your back. When you've got it, start leaning the mast from side to side to get a feel for how the board moves. When you lean the mast to the back of the board, it luffs up or turns to windward. When you lean the mast forward, it bears away or turns to leeward. Then return to the correct master beam position. Now keep leaning the mast to one side and adjusting your position with small steps. See how you can turn a board a full 180 degrees, with the sail always facing the same direction. Now try the same exercise on the other side and try a full 360-degree turn.
Practice these exercises, they show you just how the sail can maneuver the board. Well, now let's get the board to the water and try the starting position there. The board weighs just 20 kilos and it's easy enough to carry to the water's edge by tucking it under your arm. The sail, which is even lighter, can be carried above the head with the mast side to the wind, so the wind does half the work for you. Now with the dagger board in place, attach the rig to the board. The universal joint should click firmly into place. We'll be going into how to rig your sailboard later in the programme, but for the time being, let's get on with the first waterborne lesson. Try to position your board so that your back is to the wind with the sail lying to leeward, that is, away from the wind, so that you can get into the master beam position quickly and easily. Now pull the rig out of the water. It'll be harder this time because water will have collected on the sail. Straighten your knees so the load is taken by your legs and not by your back. Hold the rig by the uppermost knot and let it swing just clear of the water and correct the sail until it's at right angles to the board. Now check your posture. Remember, your front foot should be against the mast, your back foot against the dagger board. Your hips should be forward, your knees slightly bent, your shoulders back, your arms almost stretched. That's the master beam position on water. Now move the sail from side to side, remembering by moving the sail to the front of the board turns downwind, to the back of the board and it turns upwind. Now keep moving the sail to one side and take small steps until you've turned 180 degrees, then the full 360 degrees. You'll find this exercise invaluable when you come to try to steer your way back into the master beam position. You'll need to get into the master beam position when you start off sailing and after completing a manoeuvre and whenever you get into difficulties, so learn to get it right. Once you can get into the master beam position with ease, you can start thinking about the sailing position. So back to Dee now on the simulator.
Start off in the master beam position, with the wind behind you and your sail at right angles to the board. Now with your mast hand, that's the hand nearest the front of the board, cross over and grab hold of the boom. Now release your other hand and drop it by your side. Pull the mast across you to your mast hand shoulder until you can see the front of your board through the window of the sail. Then use your other hand, what we call your sheet hand, to grasp the boom and sheet in. That means bring the sail closer to you. When you sheet in, lean the mast slightly forward, then bring it back until the boom is level with the water, and if you were on the water, you'd be off, sailing.
Practice this sequence of movements for getting underway again and again. Once you're on the water in this position, the board will get underway quickly, so make sure you can carry out the procedure smoothly without losing your balance, and only then try it out on the water. Remember, you always start off in the master beam position with the wind behind you and your sail at right angles to the board. With your mast hand, cross over and grasp the boom and pull the mast to your mast shoulder, getting that angle just right, and lean the mast towards the front of the board and to windward. Then with your sheet hand, take the boom and sheet in, bringing the boom towards you and lean it towards the front of the board. Once you're underway, bring the boom back until it's level with the water and you're off. Now let's check your posture. Your arms should be bent with your hands slightly wider apart than your shoulders. Your body inclined to the front of the board, your back legs slightly bent to keep the weight on your hips, your shoulders back and bottom in. That's what we call the basic sailing position. And once you've got the feel for it, you can practice regulating the speed of your sailboard. To pick up speed, you sheet in. That is, you bring the sail closer to you. To slow down a bit, you sheet out. That is, you hold the sail away from you. After getting underway, the uncertain beginner will probably want to sheet out a bit to reduce speed. But when you're feeling more confident, sheet in to accelerate and enjoy your first sensation of board sailing. But before we get carried away, we should look at another method of getting into the basic sailing position. It's the method used for getting underway in rough weather conditions, but some beginners find it easier using this alternative method to get underway in all weather conditions, so it's worth looking at now.
From the master beam position, you release the mast hand, and instead of grasping the boom, take hold of the mast while dropping your sheet hand by your side. Now proceed as before, bringing the mast up until you see the front of the board through the sail window. Now sheet in, and after you've sailed a short distance, put your mast hand on the boom, thus assuming the same basic sailing position we saw before. As you grasp the boom, your mast foot should be behind the mast this time, with your other foot still on the dagger board. As you sheet in, bring your mast foot against the side of the mast, pointing forward.
Remember, the only difference with this alternative method being that you grab the mast with your mast hand and your mast foot should start off behind the mast. Some beginners find that by grabbing the mast they feel more in control at this early stage of board sailing. It's really a matter of personal preference. But whichever method you use, you should end up in the basic sailing position, experiencing the sensation of the sailboard. It's terrific, but you can't go on like this indefinitely. Sooner or later, you're going to want to change course. So back to Dee and the simulator for a steering lesson.
From the basic sailing position, you want the board to bear away to leeward. Simply lean the mast forward and the board will bear away, turning downwind. Now adjust your course and bring your sail back into the basic sailing position. Now try sailing into the wind, that is, luffing up or sailing to windward. Lean the mast back, keeping it along the centre line of the board, and the board will luff up, upwind. Now watch what your arms should be doing. When bearing away, your forward arm should be stretched and your back arm bent close to your chest. When luffing up, your back arm is extended while your forward arm is bent.
It's simple. Mast forward to take you downwind, mast back to carry you upwind. Let's see if it works on the water. You're in to bear away, lean the mast forward, keeping it along the centre line of the board, and your board sails away from the wind, downwind. Now to sail upwind, lean the mast back, keeping it along the centre line, and the board will luff up. Practice moving in each direction a few times and see how easily the board reacts to the steering manoeuvre, until you feel you can change direction at will. It feels marvellous. You're in command. But are you? Unless you plan to cross the stretch of water you're embarked upon, you're going to want to return at some point, and that requires turning your sailboard, which makes it time for a little more theory. You've seen how we've steered our sailboard on a straight course with the wind coming from behind in the basic sailing position. And you've seen how, if you lean the mast back, you can luff up into the wind, and how, by leaning the mast forward, you can bear away downwind. If you continue to bear away, incidentally, you can run dead before the wind, a technique called running, which we shall be looking at shortly. And the same is true if you're on the opposite tack, that is, facing the opposite direction. You can alter your course to a degree. But you'll have noticed by now that a sailboard, like other sailing boats, reaches a limit. A sailboard cannot sail into the wind. The wind must be blowing at more than a certain angle to dead ahead, an angle of around 45 degrees. If you luff up into this no-go area, the sail begins to shake. The angle is too small for the wind to have any driving power on the sail, and you will first stop and then most likely fall off. But suppose you want to sail your board back along the way you came. You have two alternatives. One is to bear away and get sailing again on the other tack. That's called a jibe. The other is to turn through the wind onto the other tack, so the opposite side of your sail faces the wind. That's a tack. We'll take a look at how to tack first, as that's the most important manoeuvre for the board sailing beginner. Suppose there's an onshore wind and you're sailing across the wind in the basic sailing position we've already learned. To tack is to turn up into and through the wind, enabling you to get away from the shore and reach your way out to sea. You can see how important it is for the beginner to be able to learn to tack before any of the other board sailing manoeuvres. By the time the beginner has taken the first cautious steps to get into the master beam and then the sailing positions, an onshore wind could carry him drifting back onto the shore. Unless you tack, you'll find it hard to get underway. If there's an offshore wind, you could be carried downwind away from the shore, and you'll need to be able to tack your way back. So take care to perfect your tacking technique. It's essential.
You're in the sailing positions, sailing across the wind. Now, just as we learned to luff up or sail to windward by leaning the mast back, simply keep leaning the mast back in order to tack, that is, to turn into the wind. Bring your board into the wind, but before the wind can catch the sail from the other side, grab hold of the uphaul line with your sheet hand first and then your mast hand. Lean the sail over the back of the board so that the board goes through the wind. Move around the mast with small steps, keeping it close to you. Then take up the master beam position and, on your new tack, get into the sailing position. A handy slogan to remember with this manoeuvre: back to tack.
And that's how it's done, how to alter course by turning the board 180 degrees through the wind. Let's watch this manoeuvre once more on the simulator. Now let's see if it works on the water. We'll catch up with the board in the sailing position. Now lean the mast back as far as possible. When you can feel the wind about to make the sail flap, catch hold of the uphaul line and steer the sail over the back of the board. Return to the master beam position and take up the sailing position now on the opposite course. Practice until you can get the movement quite smooth and effortless. Once you can tack like this, you'll find that you're in command over where you want to go on your sailboard. Well, almost. There'll be situations where the opposite manoeuvre, the turn away from the wind or the jibe, will be invaluable. The wind is onshore and so you've tacked. You've turned back the way you came and you're 10 metres or so windward, heading away from the shore and out to sea. But is this where you want to be? Suppose there's another sailboard in the way, or suppose you're tired and you want to turn back into the shore. You'll have to turn away from the wind. That is, jibe, so ending up 10 metres or so leeward or nearer the shore. So, back to the simulator.
To jibe, lean the mast forward, just as we did when we learned to bear away, but keep leaning it forward until you can feel the board being borne away. Grab the up-haul line with both hands and keep leaning the sail over the front of the board. Move around the back of the board with small steps, keeping close to the mast. Take up the mast to beam position on the other side, and then, with your new mast hand, take up the sailing position again.
Let's watch that manoeuvre once more on the simulator. From the sailing position, lean the mast as far forward as possible until the board is borne away by the wind. Then lean the sail over the front of the board, take up the master beam position and then the sailing position. As you can see here, you can use either methods of getting back into the sailing position. This method could be particularly helpful in rough weather. Practice tacking and jibing until you're quite sure of the sequence of movements and find no difficulty in keeping your balance as you turn. By executing these smooth, steady turns, you can reach across the water and enjoy sailing across the wind for some distance. But suppose you want to sail your board in different directions. This requires learning some additional manoeuvres. So far, we've learned to reach across the wind in steady turns, but to move up into the wind from A to B with speed, you need to be able to sail close to the wind, a technique called beating. And to use the wind to get you from B back to A, you need to sail with the wind directly behind you, a technique called running. Both techniques are vital when it comes to racing. Let's look at beating first on the simulator.
From the sailing position, lean the mast back until you come up into the wind. The idea is to get as close to the wind as possible, until you can almost feel the wind trying to come around the other side of the sail. Lean the mast forward a few degrees back into a close haul sailing position. Sail on like this for a while, and then tack, making sure that when you take up the sailing position again, you have the sail as close to the wind as possible. That is, as close to the 45-degree no-go area as you dare. That's what's meant by beating.
To beat, you carry out the same movements as in tacking, only the process is much tighter. See how you can carry out quick, neat turns. It's important to practice beating because when there's a strong offshore wind, you'll always be sent further out to sea unless you can beat your way back. And see how fast you can beat on the upwind leg of a race. For the downwind leg of a race, incidentally, you'll need to know how to run. So back now to the simulator.
From the sailing position, lean the mast forward to the front of the board and follow it around as it bears away. The sail should be across the board in front of you, so it's at right angles to the wind and the direction in which you're sailing. As the board bears away, move your weight back and take small steps to the back of the board until you're standing behind the mast and looking forward.
That's the running position, but we can't leave it there. Suppose you need to steer in order to avoid a collision. The sail, of course, is set before you, so don't forget to look through the window.
To steer to the right, lean the rig to the left. To steer to the left, lean the rig to the right.
Remember, bring the rig right across you and stand back on the board. Keep your arms bent so that if there's a sudden gust of wind, you can straighten them and so keep your balance. So we've learned to sail, to steer, to turn and to manoeuvre our sailboard with speed. It's time now to recap by taking a look at some of the mistakes beginners make. However hard you've been concentrating, you're bound to make mistakes and take a tumble or two while you're learning. But the mistakes beginners make tend to be the same, so it could be worthwhile looking at some of the classics. It could save you some disappointments and stop you getting wetter than you have to. To start at the very beginning, the would-be board sailor often finds difficulty getting the rig out of the water. Inevitably, she loses her balance and falls. Let's look again at what went wrong. First, the board isn't at right angles to the wind with the rig downwind, so the wind is catching the sail and making it difficult to pull up the rig. Second, as she begins to clear the sail from the water, she moves her front foot towards the front of the board, so upsetting the balance, and she falls before she can get the rig clear of the water. Now let's watch Dee start off. See how he keeps the sail downwind, brings the mast right up to him, and so clears the water, keeping his feet in the balanced position. He gets into the starting position and keeps dry. Here's another classic mistake, failing to bring the mast up to the correct position before sailing away. She doesn't bring the mast across her body before sheeting in, and so the wind catches the sail in the wrong position, the rig becomes too much to hold, and in she goes. Now let's watch Dee. He brings the mast right across him and so catches the wind at the right moment as he sheets in, and he's off and dry. Posture is all important when board sailing. Our pupil's holding the mast away from her with her arms straight and her bottom out. It's an unbalanced and risky position, so when a gust of wind comes, the sail gets plucked out of her hands and she falls in. Now let's look at Dee again in his sailing position. He's standing straight, with his body inclined to the front of the board and his knees slightly bent. His arms are bent as well, so that if a gust of wind comes, he can take the strain by straightening them, keep his balance and stay on the board. Moving on now to tacking, we see that getting the rig clear of the water here is just as important as it was at the start. Here she creates drag by dipping the rig into the water as she swings it over the back. The board can't get around and she falls off. Look at Dee as he tacks. He swings the rig well clear of the water, executes a perfect tack and keeps dry. But don't get depressed. Because mistakes beginners make are so common, they're easy to put right. You'll soon be underway like the best of them. It's time to learn to put our sailboard together. We'll assemble a Mistral competition board. Other boards vary slightly, but the principles of rigging are more or less the same for each board type.
Start with the skeg. Fit it into the skeg box and secure it tightly with a screwdriver. That is, screwdriver tight. Check that it works by moving it so that it curves back towards the back of the board. Now place the dagger board in the dagger slot so that it's flush and not protruding. Attach the mast tip to the top of the mast. Now unfurl the sail and shake it out. Slide the mast up through the sail's mast sleeve until it's fully stretched and taut. Fit the universal joint onto the bottom of the mast and thread the downhaul line through the eyelet at the foot of the sail near the mast sleeve. Make it fast using several half hitches. Adjust the tension according to the wind conditions. If there's a strong wind, make it tighter and continue tying until there's no spare rope left flapping. Now you need to attach the wishbone boom to the mast. Start by tying the in-haul line onto the mast. Make a half loop of rope, pass it around the mast a couple of times. Then slide the wishbone boom up the mast, feeding the sail through as you go. When the wishbone boom is in position, take the in-haul line around the front of the boom and then once around the back of the mast. Then back through the front of the boom and then cleat it. That is, fix it into the groove and then tie off the loose end in 2 half hitches for additional security. Check that the mast and boom are firmly locked. Take the outhaul line now and pass it through the cleat on the boom. Thread it through the hole on the tip of the wishbone and then through the clew on the sail and back through the other hole on the tip of the wishbone and to the opposite cleat on the boom. Once again, pull tight for strong winds and leave slightly slacker for milder conditions. Now attach the shock cord. That's the elasticated bit of rope which holds the uphaul line to the bottom of the mast. Tie a knot in the uphaul line, not too tight. You have to get the shock cord through it and then attach it to the uphaul line with a bowline. Then clip the shock cord onto the downhaul line. Pick up the sail now and check that all the fastenings look right. Now take the board down to the water's edge. You're ready to connect the 2 parts of the sailboard, the board and the sail. You'll find that the universal joint just needs a firm push to click into place.
Rigging a sailboard may look complicated at first, but when you've practiced it several times, you'll find it can be done very easily in less than 5 minutes. So you're ready to go, almost anyway. There are some simple but vital safety procedures that the board sailor should take note of before setting out. Are you dressed properly? If the temperature is below 75 degrees Fahrenheit or 24 degrees centigrade, you should wear a neoprene wetsuit. Even in sunshine you can get cold through overexertion and a constantly blowing wind. Check the weather forecast.
And the weathermen tell us today will be dry and sunny throughout the area. Winds light and
A
variable.
beginner should never set out in winds more than force 3, that is, gentle breezes, and pay particular attention to offshore winds. Ask local people about currents and shipping lanes. Always tell someone where you're going and when you expect to be back, and try wherever possible to sail with a group, particularly at the beginning. If you do get into difficulties and realise that you can't make it back to shore safely due to weather conditions or perhaps just fatigue, use the internationally recognised signal for help. If there's no one in sight, carry out the self-help procedure before it's too late. Unfasten the mast and remove the boom. Roll up the rig as neatly as possible and secure it with the ropes that make up the rig. Place the rig along the board and lie on the board in such a way that no part of the rig or your body can create drag in the water. Using your hands, start to paddle. Leave the dagger board in position. It helps to stop the sailboard from drifting sideways. This way you can paddle ashore or to the nearest anchored object without getting exhausted. If you come into sight, repeat your signal for help. And finally, do you know your rights of way? The rules apply to all sailing craft, whether boards, dinghies or yachts. When two boards are coming from different directions and there's danger of a collision, the one with the wind coming at its starboard side, that is the right-hand side, has right of way. It's easy to remember, wind from the right equals right of way. If the wind's coming from the same side for both craft, then the leeward or downwind craft has the right of way. If a board overtakes another, then the overtaking board must stay clear and not force the other to change course. If a ship or a yacht appears that, because of its size or for some other reason, must travel in a certain channel, the board sailor must get out of the way in good time. As soon as you can get your board around the lake or the bay in the direction you choose, tacking and jibing with ease, you're ready to try racing. Sailboard racing takes place at all levels, from international competition standard to a small club race or just a race between friends. Since that's where you're most likely to start, we'll show you how to set about it. All you need is 3 marks, a starting boat if possible, and some enthusiastic board sailors. Most sailboard racing takes place on an Olympic triangle course, which is based on 3 marks. A windward mark, set as its name indicates, upwind from the start line, a jibe mark, positioned roughly 90 degrees from the other 2, and finally the leeward mark, which can form one end of the start line. The first leg of the course, which is sailed around these 3 marks, is called the triangle. That is, the first stretch beating on a windward course to mark 1, the windward mark, then reaching off the wind and jibing round mark 2, then reaching again and hardening up on mark 3, the leeward mark. That's the triangle. The next leg is simply beating up again to mark 1 and returning on a dead downwind course to the leeward mark. This leg is often called the sausage for reasons that you can see. The final leg, or final beat as it's called, marks the last windward journey to the finish line, which is usually set from the windward mark. The competitors are given 10-minute, 5-minute and 1-minute warning signals to get themselves into position along the starting line, set here between the leeward mark and the starting boat. The time is used to get a feel for the wind, which may well have shifted since the starting line was set. The boards will make test passes across the line to find out which end is the farthest upwind, and so which end gives the most advantageous start. The starboard end appears to be the favourite, and by the time the starting signal's given, the boards are grouped at that end, farthest from the camera. But in this case, it's the board sailor who's chosen the port end away from the general congestion who gets the head start over the others. As the others follow, we can see the disadvantage of bunching together. Those farthest from the camera are getting the benefit of the wind, while those nearest to us are dropping behind through lack of it. Out ahead now, the one who got away on a starboard tack puts in a quick port tack, thereby crossing the entire fleet and confirming his lead. The first beat can be the most important of the race. It's here that you can get and keep your lead. There are 3 tactics you can follow on the beat. Beat up the port side, beat up the starboard side, or take a middle course. Your decision will be dictated by the position of the other boards and by wind shifts. The next problem will be to decide on your lay line. That's the line on which you approach the buoy, always remembering that the board on the starboard side has the right of way. Let's pick up the board in the lead now. He's approaching the buoy on the starboard tack, but the lay line he's chosen falls short and he has to put in a further tack to make it to the buoy. If there'd been other boards up with him at this point, he could have lost a few places, but as it is, he's so far ahead that he gets away with his mistake. We're now on the first reach, heading for the second mark, the jibe mark, generally regarded as the most difficult buoy to round. Here we catch up with 3 boards approaching the jibe mark, with 1 board clearly in the lead. See how the first board takes the mark wide, leaving a perfect opportunity for the second board to cut in and overtake. The boards are now on the second reach, the third side of the triangle, on their way to the leeward mark. Here we'll catch up with 2 boards racing for the advantage on this second reach. For convenience, we'll call them the blue sail and the red sail. The red sail tries to overtake and succeeds by cutting off the wind supply to his opponent, a tactic called giving someone bad wind. Let's watch it done slowly. You can see how the blue sail backs as it loses wind, and the red sail passes and takes up the lead. Coming up to the third buoy, the leeward mark, you'll want to ensure that you get a good inside position to harden up around the mark for the second beat to windward. Watch these 3 racing for the buoy. They all manage to cut it finely to get on a close haul for the beat up wind. We're now on the second beat, a stretch where the board sailors get another opportunity to change places by skillfully swapping tacks according to wind shifts. We'll pick the boards up as they approach the windward mark. The technique here is to cut it fine as we see the red sail doing. He's now in an ideal position to complete that sausage, that is, the dead run downwind. The 2 sails who follow take the mark far too wide. They'll lose valuable time in getting into the downwind run. The red sail's well ahead. The downwind run is looked on as the most difficult. The technique is to find a clear wind passage for yourself and, wherever possible, to give bad wind to the boards in front. The red sail has a clear wind passage and he's in the lead, but be careful not to get overconfident when racing for the next mark. See how he hits it, and that means, according to the rules, he has to go round that buoy again. He loses time and so allows the other sailboards, who were way behind, to catch up with him at the mark, and he loses his impressive lead. The boards are now beating up to the windward mark for the third and final time on the final leg of the race. As with the starting line, the board sailor will want to approach the finishing line at the end farthest downwind. Here we see the red sail tack to get into that position, crossing the finishing line, which is marked out by the boat and the first mark, at a point nearest the buoy, and he's won. You can get a lot of fun out of racing, and it's the best possible practice for learning exactly how fast you can maneuver your board in relation to changing winds. Try it out with a few friends at a local club, and with sailboard racing now an official Olympic event, who knows where you could end up. And now for the fun and games, the exhibitionist side of board sailing, if you like, but also what makes the sport so challenging and varied. You need to be fairly expert at the regular board sailing manoeuvres before you try these tricks, but above all, you need a sense of adventure, the will to push yourself and your board to the very limits, and of course, a sense of the ridiculous. There are as many tricks as you care to think of. We'll start though with this one called Inside Wishbone. Let's get Dee to show us how it's done.
The idea, just as the name implies, is to sail inside the wishbone. It has to be done quickly and deftly if you're to get there without losing your balance. So let's look at it in slow motion. From the sailing position, twist the wrist of your sheet hand round to hold the wishbone from underneath. Place the mast hand on the mast and duck underneath the wishbone. Lean back against the wishbone to face the sail. Remember, the sail won't be working in the same way when you're in this position, so be careful not to oversheet with the sheet hand. If the wind gets too strong, just duck and let the boom go over your head.
Let's see it done once more and on the water. Now the trick we call back to sail. It looks incredibly relaxed and comfortable, but it takes some time to get it looking that way, so let's start off on land again.
The idea is to get around in front of your sail with your back to it. Again, the movements have to be carried out quickly and confidently. Let's look at them in slow motion. Start in the sailing position. Grab hold of the up-haul line with both hands, and then place your sheet hand on the other side of the wishbone and pull the rig to windward and to the back of the board. Step to leeward of the sail, grabbing the mast with your mast hand behind your back and holding it firmly. Keep your mast foot in its usual position, slightly forward of the mast. Leaning back into the sail effectively sheets the rig in, and away you go. Remember, you may have to counter a sudden gust by either leaning forward and twisting to lose wind, or, in extreme cases, stepping quickly back the way you came, and if necessary, let the rig drop into the water.
Let's look at it in action on the sea once more. We call this one clew first. You can see why. Instead of holding the mast to the front of the board, the sails turn to put the clew on the wishbone boom first.
The secret is to be able to manipulate, and if the wind is strong, even grapple with the sail and mast. Let's watch it done slowly. From the sailing position, release the mast hand and let the mast fall to leeward away from the wind. Grab the other side of the boom confidently with both hands and bring the mast to windward and into the sailing position with the clew first. Always keep your arms bent and clew well over the center line of the board to windward.
Practice your clew first trick in a light wind. It can be difficult in strong wind conditions. The graphic description for this one is spinning sail, or sail 360. It's guaranteed to impress if you can get it right. It's all a question of timing and coordination, so let's take it bit by bit.
From the sailing position, release the mast hand and grab the boom further up, releasing your sheet hand at the same time. The wind will catch the sail and spin it round. As it spins, grab the mast with your sheet hand and, if necessary, push the sail around with your mast hand. Then grab the boom with the mast hand and sheet hand and bring the rig back into the sailing position.